"We'll need you to sign," the man said, sliding the paperwork across the desk. "This acknowledges that we had today's meeting and discussed the details of your severance package. It also confirms that you will receive COBRA health benefits and unemployment insurance." Zander looked over the documents and signed them. "I would also ask that you keep this information confidential, as we would prefer to inform the affected employees ourselves rather than have them hear it from someone else. Again, we're really sorry about this." "No problem," Zander said before rising from his chair and exiting the office, leaving the door open. "It's a problem, all right." On the way to his desk, he walked past Frances, crying in her half-sized cubicle. It was the only time he had ever seen her cry. A cardboard banker's box sat by his desk, ready for him to pack it with his belongings. Chadwick had already packed up half of his box. "So much for the long, rewarding career," Zander said. Chadwick glanced up at him from his box and then back down, shaking his head. "You'll be fine, though," Zander said. "You've got your own graphic design business." "True," Chadwick said. "That's the plan from here." Zander packed his box with a couple of notepads, a bird calendar, pins, a coffee mug with the Quality Star logo on it, a tape dispenser, disinfectant wipes, Post-it notes, a Quality Star mouse pad, a Christmas ornament shaped like a cruise ship, a picture of the team on the top deck of the Quality Star of DC, and a black and white birthday card photoshopped by Chadwick, featuring Zander posing with the Beatles. At 5:30 p.m., they all left the building for the last time. In the parking lot, Zander hugged Stacy, Mary, and Frances. "Keep in touch," Stacy said. "I will," he said, unexpectedly finding it necessary to hold back tears as it dawned on him that he was being ousted from the best job he'd ever had with people he genuinely liked working with. He shook hands with Chadwick and Pat. "Yeah, man, keep in touch," Pat said. "I'm always down for having barbecues at my place, so I'll let you know." They all got into their cars. Zander took one last look at the set of rectangular windows on the second floor next to the curved glass facade over the entrance to the brick building, the building where they would no longer make memories of working and laughing together. This layoff hits hard for Zander because he's finally at a job where he likes his coworkers. He's fine with doing the work, and as he says, so much for the long and rewarding career. That rug gets pulled out from under him, and it's all due to a merger, which of course he has no control over that. And it just seems like, throughout the novel, anytime something good happens, eventually the rug gets pulled out from under him. He carried his box into the back room and set it down by the stool where he practiced guitar. Though he had been contributing his musical talents to the praise and worship team at the local church, he doubted he would continue attending since the people there seemed to have no answers or understanding for when people lost their jobs. A member of the singles group he attended, consisting of engineers, doctors, and lawyers, once suggested he buy a house, a purchase he could never imagine because it was not in the ballpark of his financial reality. He had simply nodded as if the brightness of the idea showed great understanding of his situation. In reality, it was too embarrassing to admit he found it difficult to save much money while living paycheck to paycheck. The church expected people to keep showing up and giving 10% of their earnings, more than he could afford, but 10% was nothing to the doctors and lawyers. And it wasn't just money they expected. All members were required to give of themselves continually. If you weren't a member, you were expected to eventually join or stop showing up altogether. Unfortunately, he had felt pressured into joining, hoping he could at least feel like a part of something bigger than himself, but no one there could truly help him or explain why God thought he should lose his job after years of working in office hellholes for insultingly low pay. No one could explain why God's plan for his life was to send out resumes endlessly while enduring pointless interviews for jobs he barely wanted, simply because none of his employers ever paid him what he was worth. The church is simply another part of the whole economic system in what is not really a united country under God. It's simply, America is simply an economic zone. And so to be a part of the church, again, is going to require money, where you pay in to be a member of the club, and you're expected to continually give of your money, your time, and talents, regardless of whether you're laid off or not. And that's where the church fails Zander, because they don't understand. They are not able to give Zander any real good reason as to why he should be laid off. And that does affect his ability to be able to give to the church. And so the church tries to pretend as if it upholds spiritual values. So when somebody's laid off or has a medical emergency or is fired, the church has no answers. They just expect you to keep showing up and giving money and your time. And they'll just continue to judge you if you can't do these things, just like the rest of the world. So that's why I say the church is merely an extension of the rest of the world. It's not truly upholding spiritual values. It's upholding what the rest of the world values, because because money controls the world and how everything works. So there's no getting around that. And the people at the church that Zander encounters don't really have any compassion for him. They just kind of reject him and look down on him because he doesn't have the career, and he doesn't make great money. So because of that, none of the women in the church want to be with him because of this, because of his status. So Zander just finally feels rejected, and the layoff is pretty much the last straw of him trying to make his relationship with the church work. And so because the church rejects him, Zander has to keep looking elsewhere to find spiritual fulfillment and some sense of meaning in his otherwise meaningless existence. And so that's why eventually he turns to Buddhism, and it's there that he finds people that are more understanding and accepting of him as he is, that has nothing to do with money or his social status. Some of the people that he encounters as he's learning to practice Buddhism, they understand it's a rigged economic system, which could also be called samsara. And this is what Zander is trapped in. And it's really through Buddhist meditation that you start to see how the game works and how you're trapped in it and how karma gets involved with that. And that meditation is a way of unraveling all of this and finding a way out of samsara. Yeah, the fact that Zander has to endlessly apply for jobs that he doesn't want just makes him feel lost and in a meaningless universe. The effect of this is to put Zander into existential crisis, where he doesn't understand how he fits into the world or how what he has to offer fits in, because it seems like no matter what he does, whatever he's good at or skilled at is not valued by the world. And so the process of sending out resumes to jobs he really doesn't want, all has a dehumanizing effect on him. So he just feels like a machine cranking out resumes, and getting laid off just means he's going to have to go back to this whole dehumanizing process of having to keep sending out applications. And to me, that's part of the cruelty of layoffs, is that they just assume you're going to be able to find another job when that's not always the case. And even if you do find one, it may not pay as well, or it may be something you don't like necessarily. And so Zander's back in this situation again that he hates. He hates the whole process. He hates the process of sending resumes. He hates the process of interviews, because it's all about jumping through hoops, and it has nothing to do with who he is as a person or the types of skills he has to offer. So in the end, of course, it makes him feel depressed and anxious, and it makes him feel trapped. And that leads to despair. So, and it is very much like the cycle of samsara. It's just a vicious cycle of gains and losses. And that's the karmic cycle of good things happen and then bad things happen. And it's through meditation that we're able to take a more objective look at what's going on. This explains why Zander eventually is attracted to Buddhism, because he lacks, throughout the novel, up until that point, he lacks an ability to really see clearly the way that samsara works, and how none of it is really his fault. In February of the following year, Lloyd called everyone into the office to warn them about potential layoffs due to their work going digital with the phasing out of print production. My advice is to start looking for a job now while you can. 2 weeks later, Herb, the office manager, announced that the office would undergo layoffs in stages, and Zander was in the first group to go. If you hadn't left the company, you might have been able to stay on longer, Herb said. Yeah, right. I was supposed to just keep working here for a bullshit wage and never try to find a better job. After leaving Herb's office, Zander wandered to the other side of the building to gaze through the big 11-story windows one last time. Tall office buildings and black-windowed condos he could never afford stood lifeless under the gray sky. Church spires loomed like something to impale himself on, and the radio tower on the other side of the water seemed too distant to communicate with anyone. Down below, the mechanical arm of a yellow excavator demolished the skeletal remains of an old building, scattering dust everywhere. A reminder that the only reality was constant change. Another layoff already, he thought, holding his box of miscellaneous office supplies as he rode the elevator down for the last time. I don't know how much more of this I can take. The second layoff just shows how society works like chutes and ladders, that sometimes you're up, sometimes you're down, but there's no real stability. Herb is simply just playing the game by trying to inflict guilt on Zander for leaving the company, for trying to find better work and better pay. It's just a way of gaslighting Zander at that moment. And by doing that, Herb takes accountability away from the company whenever these types of layoffs happen. So they didn't have the foresight to see that digital was going to take over and that print would be phased out. But, a more responsible company might have seen this coming and seen somebody like Zander as having a lot to offer, and maybe could have, find something else for him to do within the company. Everybody is a part of this game of uncertainty, but a lot of it is also caused by these companies who do not take responsibility for their own actions. They have poor planning skills, and they don't have a real plan for when things like this happen. They participate in mergers and acquisitions which do not at all take into account humanity or how it impacts people when they lay people off. This kind of system sees the worker as expendable. The way that Herb is responding, again, is just denying Zander of his dignity as a worker by saying, you should just be happy to keep working this bullshit job for low pay and be happy with that instead of expecting anything more than that. When you graduate from college, they hand you a degree and kick you out into the world to find a job you hate so you can get married and have kids, only to come home stressed out and irritable every day until you finally get a divorce. I simply haven't been willing to play that game despite the daily anguish it has caused me. I have no money, no wife, and I probably will never own a house. If you make less than $30,000 a year, you don't exist. I don't exist. I'm a failed experiment. Lou squinted as if trying to understand Zander's perspective. But that's not the totality of who you are, he said. It only means you didn't get the results you were looking for. To be successful in the society, you have to be ambitious, driven, and opportunistic. I'm not saying I embody those qualities. I just got lucky because I met Marilyn. I never would have made it without her. I think Lou is similar to Dr. Golden in that he's trying to help Zander, although in this case it's more along the spiritual path. But similar to Dr. Golden, he's also sensing this kind of fatalistic outlook and the despair that Zander feels and realizes, this is a danger. And so he has to give Zander guidance, but at the same time, this guidance involves challenging Zander's perspective. So when he hears Zander saying things like this, he's not going to just accept it. He's going to continue to challenge Zander to see himself as more than just a career or whether he's married or not or whatever social status he has. And meditation is the path of losing all of these various identities that Zander is still having trouble freeing himself from. So while Lou does understand what the typical qualities are of the successful person in America and lists them all, he doesn't necessarily embody those or think that those are things that Zander should be striving for. It's not that he's totally dismissing them. He does acknowledge them, but says, don't put so much stock in success in America, because ultimately to the spiritual life, those aren't really the values that you're trying to develop anyways. A lot of the values you're trying to develop have nothing to do with career success, and a lot of it doesn't have anything to do with how much money you make either. How much money you make doesn't define who you are. So while Zander says things like he's a failed experiment, he doesn't make enough money, and therefore he doesn't exist, it is Lou's job to challenge Zander's perspective on these things, or else he's not a very good spiritual teacher. And he's challenging not just the wisdom, but the truth in this way of thinking. So when Zander says these things, that's how the world sees Zander, but that's not the reality of how Zander actually is. It's just how the world defines Zander. And Lou is telling him to stop believing the way that the world is defining him, because that's not the reality of who he is. No, this is not at all true of Zander. He does want to work. He just doesn't want to work with a sense of meaninglessness, being alienated from the work that he's doing. He wants to work with a sense of purpose, doing something meaningful and fulfilling with his life, but that's not what he finds. So it's not just that he just doesn't want to work at all. He does actually want to work and contribute, but he is frustrated in how he wants to work. Because of having to work so many bullshit jobs for bullshit pay, it's simply about getting a paycheck. It's simply about having a roof over your head and food on the table and being able to pay the bills, just basic needs, which again, all this amounts to is just survival in this kind of a system. On a warm and windy April day, Zander walked with Lou through the backyard under a blue sky streaked with clouds until they reached a stone bench. They sat facing the blue-gray water while an American flag rippled in the wind at the end of a long pier. "What does that flag mean?" Zander asked. "It used to stand for something. Now I'm not sure what it means." "I think it's supposed to be a symbol of freedom," Lou said. "Maybe relative freedom, though." "Yeah, something like that." Yeah, as they are discussing while looking at the American flag, the only way that they can define freedom is in a relative way compared to maybe some other countries that maybe don't have quite as many choices. Maybe the standard of living isn't as high, but it's all just relative freedom. The true sense of freedom, though, is not what America has to offer. Does freedom mean being a wage slave? Working a job that you hate simply so that you can have food and shelter? Is that real freedom? The way society has evolved now, it's becoming like we don't even have the freedom anymore to agree to disagree anymore. Is that real freedom? It's like we're moving more and more towards less and less freedom. And the internet is also complicit in this. Technology is complicit in this, giving the powers that be more and more control. And the people with money have more control. So our freedoms are becoming more and more diminished. And Zander is just realizing the beginning of this whole process. The idea of freedom is something that people talk about, but nobody really seems to know what it actually means. So it's kind of like the myth of freedom in America. Yeah, the book is targeting all of the different broken and corrupt elements of American society that are conspiring against Zander or anyone like Zander to ensure that they never thrive in life. All they can do is try to survive because all of his desires and aspirations and interests are thwarted along the way because there's no real financial support for him. It's not just broken systems, it's corrupt systems because money is behind all of it. And people follow money, and corporations are going to follow where the money is, regardless of how it affects humanity. And so the people working in these systems are not treated as actual human beings. They are simply exploited for their labor. If you're not a willing game player in the system, you'll be punished for it the way Zander is. And your talents and whatever you have to offer will be ignored, and you'll simply be seen the way Garrett sees Zander, as simply a pawn with nothing of real value to offer society. And so Zander is someone that is not going to get married or have a family because he's not willing to play the game. And therefore he's not going to pass along the suffering that he has experienced to the next generation. I would say yes, that Zander finds his own sense of freedom despite the system he lives in. With guidance from Lou and through his meditation practice, he learns to disidentify with how the system wants to define him. And so that's where the real freedom lies. It's not in necessarily being successful on worldly terms. It has more to do with letting go of all of the worldly ambitions and the ways that the world defines and judges him, similar to the way he felt in that first chapter and when he's in the hospital under the influence of that drug, where all of his self-judgments drop away, the storyline drops away. Despite the ending, he does find something more like freedom that is actual real freedom, which isn't tied to his success in the world. I think the real freedom then is freedom from what Buddhism calls samsara, a way out of this vicious cycle of existence, which is cyclical, and it just keeps repeating over and over. And Zander wants to put an end to that. The only choice Zander has to keep his dignity is to simply stop participating in the game. In his final speech, Liu talks about how you can't just have the best military in the world or the biggest military and think that that means you have a culture. Yes, that may help to protect a culture, but it can't be the culture. Liu is basically lamenting that America doesn't really have a shared culture, that whatever is defining the culture is not really going in a positive direction. Whatever that culture may be, it's hard to define. But also Liu really highlights at the very end in his final speech, saying that society is not held accountable for its casualties, and that's within a capitalist system. Capitalism never has an answer for its casualties. And so Liu was really highlighting the dark side of capitalism that hides in the shadows. We never hear about it because that side of capitalism is never held accountable. So he's talking about, the deaths of despair that get swept under the rug, and oh well, that's the fault of those people. It's not the fault of the system that is inhumane and treats people as less than human. One other thing that Liu talks about is how America is not yet ready for Buddhism. And Zander's a good example of that he's somebody that wholeheartedly takes on the Buddhist teachings and tries to put it fully into practice. But because he's still trapped in this capitalistic system, the results can only be but so good. By the time he gets to the monastery, he's already too damaged, physically mainly. If there's any hope of a real Buddhism within America, America hasn't shown that it's ready for it. It's still in this transitional phase. There's like pockets of Buddhism here and there, but the materialistic culture is the thing that Liu is really criticizing, the materialistic aspect of culture as well. When you have a materialistic culture like this, it's hard to integrate Buddhism until some of these systemic issues are solved. I'm not advocating that anybody do what Zander did at the end of the novel. What Zander does at the end of the novel is more symbolic. Zander's completely frustrated with trying to play a rigged game that he can never win. No matter what he tries to do, he's shut down. I would also say that Zander's life is just a microcosm of what's happening on a larger scale in America. We're already seeing more and more people like Zander who are realizing that the American dream no longer exists, if it ever did, and that people simply cannot make it in this kind of inhumane society that runs on money and where all of the power and wealth are consolidated at the top while the middle class is disappearing. And so there's no real hope that you're ever going to rise above this kind of situation. The burning cities could be a larger scale version of what happens with Zander. I don't think America is sustainable in the direction it's going. And I've watched my entire life two different parties going back and forth. And every time you vote for one of them, nothing ever changes. It's just the same, it's like the same party on both sides, where the elites continue to hold all the power and the wealth, and they're not willing to give it up. And it just shows how little they truly care about the people that live in this country. And another problem with America is it doesn't value the spiritual practitioner. It doesn't value the artist, and so therefore they don't. The artist is not paid, but treated like a cockroach. You know, you're despised. And, you know, if you're an artist, especially if you're not successful, people just look down on you. You know, and think what a fool you are, thinking that your art is ever going to matter. And then that's exactly why Lou says, you know, do we really have a culture, or is this just like some fake culture where the people who really aren't talented are the ones who rise to the top simply because they have all the connections and the power and the money? Those are the people that make it. It's not about talent. So it goes back to that again. It goes back to the American dream is simply an illusion, and people are catching on now that it's an illusion, and we're going to see more and more people losing their livelihoods because, number one, of AI. We see already that these companies and the leaders in charge do not care if people lose their livelihoods, and they don't have a plan for what to do with people who will no longer have a sense of purpose in life. They won't be financially supported, at least not that I've heard. People are going to continue to be more and more fed up and disillusioned. Like Zander, the only real hope of change is for society to experience a total collapse and to rise from, whether it's physical or metaphorical, I don't know, but rise from the ashes. A total collapse may be necessary, and that may be the only thing that's going to ever result in real change. If Buddhism is to be integrated into this society, then I think people would give a lot less value to what they see on their screens, like social media. They would see through it, but they would also understand. I think people would have a lot better understanding of the karmic consequences of how they speak and how they act, and they would be paying a lot more attention to those things. And if people did that, we'd have a much more respectful society where people actually respected each other. Even if you did have cultural differences, people would still be respectful. And but that's not what we have today, and we're going in the completely opposite direction. You cannot call yourself a Buddhist and still be holding on to ill will towards anybody that has a different viewpoint from you. And that's one of the losses of freedoms in this country, is that we're losing the ability to simply agree to disagree. That just shows a total lack of wisdom, and it's because of people's ignorance that they hop onto this tribal mindset and say, you know, things like, if you disagree with me, well, you're my enemy now. And that's not the Buddhist way.